Hello, my name's Tim Malone, and I taught American history at Elgin Community College in Elgin, Illinois for 25 years. And today we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation, our first Constitution. Now, if you remember, in the last lecture, we talked about how revolutionary was the American Revolution and the debate that's gone on for quite some time about whether it was a revolution or not, whether it deserves the name. As I put forward last lecture, I think it was revolutionary. The American Revolution was a true revolution and deserves the name. One of the revolutionary aspects of our revolution that has kind of been lost because it's conquered the world is constitutionalism. The American Revolution brought forward the idea that a government should be based upon a written document, that there should be a written outline of how the government that's being set up is going to work, a constitution. We had the first written constitution. Well, we'll talk about the Constitution in a minute, but most Americans don't know or don't realize that we had two constitutions. The first one was called the Articles of Confederation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Articles of Confederation because it's interesting and illustrative of constitutionalism. In 1776, in March of 1776, the Continental Congress, this rogue rebel outfit that had constituted itself and declared independence from Great Britain, the Continental Congress. In March of 1776, they passed three resolutions. One was to appoint a committee to write a Declaration of Independence. Now, we all know how that turned out on July 4th of that year. The second act was to appoint a committee to write a constitution for the new independence-declared nation. The third was to send an ambassador to France to try to get the French in, which the next year in 1777 succeeded when the French entered the war. So the result of the committee assigned to write a constitution were the Articles of Confederation. Now, the articles were written before the end of the year 1776. However, the way the Continental Congress worked, in order for something that profound to be passed, all 13 colonies had to sign on. It had to be unanimous. So it wasn't until 1781, 5 years later, that all 13 colonies, now states, accepted the Articles of Confederation. However, from the very time that they were written, towards the end of 1776, the Continental Congress abided by them. So in other words, despite the fact that for 5 years the articles weren't technically approved or ratified, they were still used as the plan of government of the new government. The Articles of Confederation. Most Americans, right? There's a story told about the Articles of Confederation, right? The Articles of Confederation were not up to the task. That's the story, and had to be replaced with our Constitution that we have now. The story kind of goes that the Articles of Confederation were weak and bad and had to be replaced by our Constitution, which was strong and good. Articles of Confederation weak and bad, and therefore had to be replaced with something stronger and better, our Constitution. That's the story. And I guess there's something to that. I have a little bit different notion of things. And so I want to talk about positive things one could say about the Articles of Confederation. Perhaps try to rehabilitate the Articles a little bit. First is that the United States won the war for independence under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were the outline of government from 1776 to 1787, and we won the war under the Articles. That's no small feat. Again, we were fighting the British, the foremost military power in the world, certainly in terms of naval power. And again, the British were old hands in North America. They'd fought many wars in North America, and yet these 13 colonies defeated them and won their independence. That was done under the Articles of Confederation. Secondly, the Confederation Congress negotiated a very favorable peace treaty at Paris in 1783. We talked about the Treaty of Paris in the last lecture, and the fact that, again, in my opinion, that the area of North America from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, south of the Great Lakes, the territory I'm sitting in right now, I'm in Illinois, was thrown in. The 13 states, the 13 original colonies, had no real claim to that territory, and yet their negotiators at Paris somehow managed to have this tremendously rich area assigned to the new nation. This is, as I said in the last lecture, this is an aspect of American history, a turning point. Historians are always looking for turning points. A not fully recognized turning point in the history of this country. Let me repeat. If the United States had been confined to the Appalachian Mountains, the Proclamation Line of 1763, if the British would have said, here's your new country, we would have taken it. And it's hard to imagine the history of the United States under that circumstance, without the area between the mountains and the river being part of the original United States. And that treaty was negotiated and approved under the Articles of Confederation. Concerning that piece of ground, west of the mountains, due to ancient charters, various of the 13 colonies, states now, had claims west of the mountains. And they overlapped, and they were in conflict. Now, some historians think that's one of the reasons the British gave that territory to the United States was, oh, they'll have trouble here, those jealous, envious, quarreling colonies or states. It'll be their undoing. However, conflicting Western land claims were adjudicated under the Articles of Confederation. The states, the new 13 states, gave up their claims of the mountains. It's quite a feat, and that was done under the Articles of Confederation. And what happened was that Virginia and New York and Connecticut, for Pete's sakes, Connecticut had land claims west of the mountains. That they not only gave up their claims, they gave the land that they gave up their claims to the federal government. In other words, the public domain was given to the central government under the Articles of Confederation. Again, that's no small feat that the Confederation, this weak and bad government, to create the public domain. The sale of the public domain will be the linchpin of the federal government's revenue for the next 75 years. And that public domain was created under the Articles of Confederation. Now here's a map of the original United States and the land west of the mountains. And if you look close at it, you can see the various claims that states had. Virginia claimed almost all of it, right? North Carolina claimed what would become Tennessee. Georgia had claims. Connecticut jumped over New York and had a claim on northern Ohio. New York had a huge claim. Uh, Massachusetts had claims. Again, that mess was adjudicated by the Articles of Confederation. It was also under the Articles of Confederation that the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 was enacted. Again, this concerns the land west of the mountains. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Again, here's an event. Here's a piece of legislation that doesn't get its due in American history. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Most historians say that Thomas Jefferson wrote the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That's disputed. There's not clear evidence. And we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson down the line here. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Wow. What a document. What a law. You can say that the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 caused the Civil War. You're like, what? Yeah, because the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 banned slavery north of the Ohio River. The Old Northwest, it's called, including Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota. The Old Northwest. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 banned slavery north of the Ohio River. Talk about creating a nation half slave and half free. This is one of the monumental acts and events in American history. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Not only did it ban slavery, it set down the rules by which territories were to become states. And now, of course, there's 50 states. Originally 13, now there's 50. Now, who does that? The 13 original colonies under the Articles of Confederation decided that there were going to be no subservient subdivisions, that all territories of the United States would become co-equal states. Whoa. The 13 original states decided to dilute their power on the principle that there should be no colonies. There should be no perpetual territories. That all the land not currently in a state would become a state. That's revolutionary at the time. It's just revolutionary. Now you might say, well, we just got done being colonies, so we didn't want to have colonies. It's interesting because 100 years later, right, with the Spanish-American War, the United States self-consciously becomes an imperial power. We'll get to that sooner or later in these lectures. We turn 180 degrees. With the Spanish-American War, we become the British. And we do that self-consciously. And to me, that's too bad. It's too bad. And to this day, right? What the heck about Puerto Rico? What the heck about Guam? I mean, we have perpetual now subdivisions, subservient subdivisions. That was against the ideology of our founding fathers, who said no subservient subdivisions, no colonies. All territories will become states. And that's where I am. I guess I'm old-fashioned, right? Puerto Rico, either independence or statehood. Now, when you get to Guam and Midway and places, little tiny islands like that, it's like, whoa, you're going to make them states? I don't know. It's not an easy problem. Washington, D.C., right, the District of Columbia, right? I'm in favor of making these places states. That was the original American value. No colonies. And that's what the Northwest Ordinance was about. The Northwest Ordinance set forward the way that these territories would become states. Now, another thing that the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 did was it set out the land survey, how the new territory west of the mountains was going to be surveyed. And it was the rectangular survey. Originally, the 13 colonies were meets and bounds, it was called, the way they were surveyed. And some of the textbooks that I have in this section about the Northwest Ordinance, they have an aerial photograph of where Pennsylvania and Ohio, the borders, because Pennsylvania is the old meets and bounds survey system, and Ohio is the rectangular survey. And it's Pennsylvania is like a jumble, and then the line, and then you get the square pattern. I mean, have you ever been in an airplane over the Midwest? The grid system, the mile square grid system, the rectangular survey. I don't know, they're squares, but they call it the rectangular survey. And I've witnessed that boundary line. I've been in an airplane on a clear day and seen with my own eye that photograph that they have in textbooks comparing Pennsylvania to Ohio. Now again, they say it was Thomas Jefferson who came up with the idea of rectangular survey, right angles, townships, 6 miles square, right? Sections, a mile square. And there's a book written some time ago about how that rectangular survey is an example of Enlightenment thinking. Jefferson's a man of the Enlightenment in some ways. And what do you want to say? What a conceit it was that we were going to impose geometry on geography. That it's like whoa, Jefferson, man, you're out there, man. You're going to square up the whole country, but you get over parts of Illinois. Now, when you get to the Rocky Mountains, right, the old rectangular survey has trouble. Right? It's not near as plain as it is in the Midwest, where you can see it. You get up in an airplane and you can see it. It's I found that interesting. That sort of the idea behind imposing order on nature, and what a quintessential American revolutionary Enlightenment concept it was. We're going to square off nature. So the Northwest Ordinances of 1787, a crucial document. Oh, here's another thing about it I should mention. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 said that every 6th section was going to be sold off to create public schools in the area. So the idea of free public schools was written in to the Northwest Ordinances of 1787. The proceeds from the sale of a certain amount of the land was going to go to the establishment of schools. And here we get something that I didn't really mention, the American Revolution's role in the development of universal compulsory education. When we talked about the Puritans, we talked about this, that the Puritans, within a few years of settling in the Boston area, had set up universal compulsory education, the first such system in the world. So New England was already there. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 took the idea that the government was responsible for compulsory universal education of its citizens and applied it to a huge area, the Old Northwest. It shows the link between the American Revolution and education, and that our founding fathers understood that link. Now, the United States historically has been in the forefront of educating its people down through history. Now, I don't know, the last 20 or 30 years, I don't know, not so much. We've kind of lost that edge of education. But boy, our nation was founded on the idea that every citizen, every person should read and write. Every person should have 8 years, because that's what the Northwest Ordinance set up, were grade schools. The country school that you can still, if you drive around northern Illinois, you can still see them. Some of them are still there. That setup came from the Northwest Ordinances of 1787, a commitment by the federal government to mass public education. Now, of course, we got to talk about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, because that's what gets the headlines in our story, right? The Articles of Confederation, weak, bad, had to be done away with so we could get our strong and good Constitution. And the Articles of Confederation did have their drawbacks. Primarily, no power to directly tax. So in order for the federal government and the Articles of Confederation to raise money, they had to go hat in hand to the states and ask for money. Not surprisingly, that didn't go very well, in that the states were reluctant to fork over money to the federal government. Therefore, the Confederation government had trouble with inflation, because the alternative, they couldn't tax, was to issue paper money. During the Revolution, they were called the Continental Notes, the Continental. And boy, inflation got out of control, because that's pretty much the only opportunity that the Confederation government had to pay its bills, was to print up a bunch of money. Oh, we'll make good on this later. Here's run the printing press. And in some places, it got out of control. $1 million for a suit of clothes. You hear those stories. I don't know. How bad the inflation was during the Revolutionary period is debatable. But it was bad. But how bad is debatable. Because inflation is frowned upon by capitalists. People who have money don't want the money depreciated. And that's true to this day. Inflation fears are a perennial propaganda, that too strong a word, is a perennial stance of the rich. Oh, inflation. No inflation. We don't want inflation. Anything but inflation. But as John Kenneth Galbraith wrote in his book Money some years ago, he said the Revolutionary War was won through hyperinflation. It worked. Running the printing press worked. We won the war. The United States was born in hyperinflation. It worked. It was the only alternative that the Confederation Congress had. And it worked. We won the war.
We have 5 minutes.
And despite the Northwest Ordinance, this is again, we're talking about weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Despite the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, there was disorder in the West. Shays' Rebellion in 1787 in western Massachusetts, where the farmers had had enough with foreclosures, and they stormed a federal arsenal at Springfield, and 8 of the farmers got killed. It was literally pitchforks versus cannons, and the Massachusetts had to raise a militia, primarily out of Boston, and march out there and put it down. There was also losses to Native Americans. One of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was that there wasn't enough money to properly create an army and a navy. And the federal army was defeated in a couple of battles with Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. And some people say that that's the main reason that the Articles were trash canned and the Constitution was written, because of the trouble the Confederation government was having subduing the Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. Nevertheless, whatever, and we're going to talk about this next, the Constitution replaces the Articles of Confederation. That's quite a story.